Welcome back to Speducation, and I am your host, Brandon Reed. If this is your first time logging on or coming to the channel, a special welcome to you. And if you don't know much about Speducation or this is your first time here, like I said, basically what this channel is it's a resource for parents, for students, maybe for teachers, or for would-be teachers, that are in college and have questions about special education. That's the reason that I created this channel, is to try to make special education a little bit easier to understand, and hopefully you get something out of it. So if you know somebody that would benefit from this, please feel free to share this channel with them or tell them a little bit about it. And then, hopefully it can help them out. So over the past few weeks, we've been breaking down what an IEP is. We started talking about what is an IEP, and then we started looking at the different parts of an IEP. So this is going to come down to week 5, and we're going to break it down even more. So we're going to talk about a few sections of the IEP, and depending on where we're at, we may finish today, or we may end up, talking about another part of the IEP next week. So we'll see where we're at the end of this. So let's dive into today's lesson. So today's topic is parts of an IEP, week 5. So today we will look at LRE, least restrictive environment, and what that is and how it relates to the IEP. And then we'll also finish up with general considerations, okay? And talking a little bit about what that is in relation to the IEP. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at LRE, least restrictive environment. Now, you're probably wondering, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, this is basically the pyramid of the least restrictive environment. When we talk about that, we're talking about we're having a discussion about what is the best placement for the child, depending on their needs, depending on the disability and the services that that are provided to them. So here, the least restrictive environment would be the general ed classroom. And that means that the student, if they have a learning disability, would be in the general ed classroom, mainstreamed. They may receive some support in the general ed classroom, but they're not going to necessarily be pulled out for services. They'll just get that assistance or that support in the classroom itself. And then, of course, the most restrictive is a residential facility, okay? And typically those facilities are for individuals whose disabilities require full-time care. They may not necessarily need full-time care, but they need, full-time supervision because maybe they're learning skills. Maybe they don't have somebody at home that, can properly take care of them. And usually in those facilities, they will provide them with schooling, with job skills, with training. They'll feed them, they'll house them, okay? And they'll even find them a job where they can go out and, and work. So when we're talking about LRE, we're talking about what is the best placement for this child, okay? And residential facilities, there are different ones across the country. Here in Indiana, we talk about New Hope of Indiana, Damar Services. Those are two organizations that have residential facilities. So what does that look like in an IEP? Well, this is the IEP, and this is the section called LRE, Least Restrictive Environment. And basically in this, we talk about if a student is 13 years or older, we have to do what's called a transition IEP. And I talked about transitions in a previous episode. But here, if the student is 13 or older, then we have to discuss what type of certification or what type of diploma are they going to get. If they are going to get a certificate of completion, that typically means that they've completed high school. They've taken all the necessary courses that they need, but maybe they didn't receive all of the credits that they needed for a typical diploma. If you receive a general diploma, okay, then that means that you've received the credits that you need and you've taken the classes, and it's a general diploma. It doesn't necessarily, it's not bad, it's not great, but it means that you've graduated from high school. And then you have general diploma core 40. Okay, that's where you're looking, that's a little bit more geared towards helping individuals get into college. It looks better on college transcripts. And then you have core 40 with academic honors and core 40 with technical honors. Typically, here in Indiana, we either go with general diploma, general designation, or we go with core 40 designation. But this is only for transition IEPs. If the child is not 13, then we don't have to worry about that. And then also, again, with the transition IEPs, if we talk about any kind of like, what is the difference between a general diploma and a general core 40 diploma? Okay. This is where we're going to put the information in here, and we're going to talk to the parents about that. And typically we'll provide them with some sort of written material that will explain it better, and they'll be able to make a decision at that point. And typically the kind of degree that they're looking to get, or they want their child to get, is typically discussed either in 8th grade or when they become a freshman in high school. So LRE placement categories, as I said, in that pyramid, you have the least restrictive, and then you have the most restrictive. So in grade, if the student is age 6 through 21, there are different categories, and each one has a code. So level 50, which I would say probably 85 to 90% of special ed students fall into that category. A level 50 means that they're in the regular class for 80% or more of the day. So that means that they might necessarily be pulled out for services and receive small group support. Okay. They might have tests read, and that would fit that category. A level 51 means that they are in the general ed class for 40% to 79% of the day. So they may have a resource class that they go to, and resource can take on a variety of different forms. Sometimes it's kind of like a special ed study hall where they can get tutoring and support for their homework and their classes. Sometimes it's more geared towards helping them achieve their goals, to work on their IEP goals or work on social emotional skills. But these are the classifications for those. Okay. So I would say probably 50, 51. Those are the two categories that you're probably going to see the most of in IEPs and special ed services, because we really try, especially here in Indiana, we really try to push that inclusion services, mainstreaming students. Now, if a child is 3 to 5 years old and they're not really in like kindergarten, but they're in preschool or daycare, these codes here are what you would use. Okay. And again, the ones that are probably the most common are 26 and 27. Okay. And then you start getting into the more restrictive down here. So, but it's the same kind of setup is up here. Okay. It's just instead of being in a general, in a regular classroom setting, you have daycare or you have preschool. Okay. And they need to follow the category for these. Hopefully I'm not confusing you or making it worse. I don't have much experience with the elementary age students, but I do with high school. And this additional descriptors of least restrictive environment, if any. So basically for this is where you put the information about whether, what kind of category you're putting the student in. So if it's a level 50, then you're going to explain, okay, this is a level 50. This is why they've put him in there. Or if there's more, if you need more detail about the least restrictive environment, additional descriptions of what that entails, you would put that in this section. Typically though, in my experience, we just put NA, okay, unless there's something, glaring that we need to put in there, because typically, we don't necessarily need to put anything in there. The next section, summarize discussion and consideration of any potential harmful effects. The thing with special ed is that it's constantly growing and evolving. And when I first started, when I first started teaching special education back in 2011, 2012, I was always told that when the issue of potential harmful effects comes up, we always put no, there are no harmful effects. However, up until about 5, 6, 7 years ago, they decided, you know what, there are some harmful effects because if we pull a student out for services, they may lose social interaction time with their peers. They may miss out on some academic material. However, they need these services in order to be successful. So the benefits outweigh the risks. And that's typically what we put in here is we talk about the potential harmful effects, but then we also reiterate that without these services, the student wouldn't be as successful. So that's what goes in here. Describe the reasons for placement determination, including other options considered and the reasons those were rejected. Basically, we are stating that, we considered all other options. The level 50, based upon the data that we have, level 50 more than meets the student's need. And any others would be too restrictive or would not provide enough service. So that's where we describe and we talk about why we chose the level of placement. And then if a student has a disability, their primary disability is behavior, okay? So like ED, emotional disability, or EH, emotionally handicapped. This section is where we would fill that out, okay? And typically, if their primary disability is ED, then we would put full-time because that means that they need full-time services. Now, that doesn't mean that they're in a separate classroom. It just means that that's primarily what we're focusing the IEP on, is helping them with social emotional skills and helping them, overcome this emotional disability. If it's secondary, then typically it's going to be other or part-time. And so typically, it's very rare that you would ever see a secondary disability of ED be a full-time, okay? But if the behavior warrants it, then it might be. However, if the student does not have an emotional disability or an emotional handicap, you don't have to worry about this section at all. General considerations. So when we talk about general considerations, basically, I'm going to summarize it for you. This basically says, can the student do things that, similar students can do without disabilities, okay? So this is where we ask these questions, okay? So student will be able to participate in all educational programs and activities, okay? If we mark yes, then that's it. If we mark no, then we have to give a reasoning why, okay? Why is the student not able to do the same kind of educational activities as the other students? And what are some exceptions that can be put in place so that the student can be successful, okay? And the biggest thing here is, maybe they have a learning disability that's specifically related to, math or reading, okay? And they can't quite get it. So maybe they need to be in a special ed classroom. So they're not going to be in science, or they're not going to be in social studies or language arts, okay? Or maybe they're not going to be in art or PE. And so if that's the case, then we would mark no, and then we would explain why. But I would say, again, 85 to 90% of the time, we would mark yes. And then the same thing here. Student will be able to participate in all non-educational and extracurricular activities. That means sports. That means clubs. Again, if the student can do those things, then we would mark yes. If no, then we would mark no, and we would describe why the student can't do those things and what are some exceptions that can be made for the student. And the same thing for PE, okay? The main thing here is that if a student is wheelchair bound, okay, and it's, a physical impairment that means that they can't necessarily do the same things as other students in a PE classroom, such as run around, run track or, lift weights or, whatever the case may be, then obviously that would be a no. And then we would explain the reasoning why. But again, it's very, very rare that we would never mark yes for this because typically it's PE. All students can participate. Student will be educated in the same school he or she would attend if not disabled. So again, if the student is attending the same school, as his non-disabled peers, then we would mark yes, okay? And then the last thing here, the length of the instructional day will be the same as that of his non-disabled peers. Again, typically it's a 7:30 or 8 o'clock to 3:30, 4 o'clock day, okay? If the student requires additional services, then again, we would mark no, and then we would explain why and the reasoning for that. Again, in the 15 years that I have been teaching, I have only seen this a couple of times. There have been some instances where a student may not be able to function for a full day. And in that case, we would mark no, and we would put that the student has difficulty adjusting to a full day schedule. And so the student will only be here for part time or part of the day. And so then we would put that in here. But again, 85 to 90% of the time, we would always mark yes. And then, of course, the next section is the program information. This is primarily just talking about the school corporation, okay, and the school itself. And each school corporation has a code. And so this is what the office, this is what the teachers and the teacher of record would do. They would put this information in here. And then next, projected education program or school. For this is where we would basically talk about where the student is going. So if a student is in 6th grade or 7th grade, then we would say the student will attend, let's say Beech Grove Middle School for his 8th grade school year. Or the student is in 8th grade and they will attend Beech Grove High School next school year, okay? That's where we put this information. Now, on those rare occasions where a parent might say, well, we're going to finish out the school year, but we've already moved, so we're going to be transitioning to, let's say, Greenwood. Then we would put that in here. The student, is in the process of moving. They will finish out the school year here at Beech Grove, and then they will move to Greenwood. That's basically all that goes in here. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. So next week, we're going to talk about reevaluation, notice of initial proposed IEP, and then notice of implementation. And that will wrap up our breakdown of the IEP. It was a long and arduous journey, but next week will be the last time that we will talk about it. So next week, reevaluation, notice of initial proposed IEP, as well as the notice of implementation. And hopefully you liked what you saw. Hopefully I didn't put you to sleep. And hopefully it was informative for you. If you did like it, please click the like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, again, if you have any questions about special education, something specific to you, or you just are curious about special education in general, please feel free to leave questions or comments in the comments section. And until next time, class dismissed.